Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we'll be exploring the subject of listening to animals. With me is Miranda Alcott. She has a master's degree in spiritual psychology and has been working in the area of interspecies communication for decades. Miranda is an old friend, and I believe the first time I interviewed her was about 20 years ago. Welcome, Miranda.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you so much for asking us. And this is Rumi. Want to sit up?
Rumi is your teammate.
Rumi is my teammate, and he is my service dog. You want to sit up? Sit up? I'm not sure he's going to sit up right now.
Okay, well,
sleepy boy.
He's happy here.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
Well, what a pleasure to be with you again, Miranda.
Thank you for inviting me. This is very exciting. And I just want to say at the beginning, thank you for how much you do for all of us. Your education and what you share and making it available to everyone is definitely up-leveling everything that happens on this planet. So thank you.
Well, I'm happy to make my little contribution, and I think you're making an important contribution as well. I think it's worth saying that in addition to your work as an animal communicator, which also involves opening up people, opening up humans to various levels of intuitive communication, you do emergency work.
I do. I do crisis response and have done that for many years.
So thank you for your service.
Yeah. It's small, but I love it.
Now, a lot of people don't realize that animals are available for communication. And in fact, they're certainly in the fields of psychology, physiology, animal science, there's been an attitude for a long time that they don't have feelings, they don't have thoughts, and the worst thing that a human can do is anthropomorphize their animals with whom they interact.
Right. And what's interesting is science is actually starting to catch up just a little bit with that, studying the different breeds of dogs, the ones that are smarter, asking them for a larger vocabulary of what they understand, wondering why it is that we now have PTSD dogs, and for active duty soldiers returning, and why they're so successful. Why are these dogs that are working with these soldiers that come home with so many challenges, why are they successful? How come the dogs are able to save the humans' lives when, as humans, we aren't able to do that yet? So very important. And that's a huge cutting-edge area I'm very excited about.
In other words, what you're saying is not only can we learn to listen to what animals are trying to communicate to us, but they're trying to teach us as well. We can learn from them.
Absolutely. And they have the most incredible ability to focus and center us when we are in crisis. If they deem there's a problem, they're on high alert. But those animals that are working with people that have different disabilities, myself being one of them, they are tuned into what we need innately because they look at it as a matter of survival and they're bonding with us. So they become our ears. They become our eyes. Very well trained, you know, and that's why I'm very supportive of the PTSD dogs. Yeah.
Now, when you say a PTSD dog, you're referring to a dog who is also experiencing something akin to what humans with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, experience.
Well, there are dogs that have, and animals that have post-traumatic stress disorder. It has to do with the amygdala, and if the amygdala is involved in a traumatic experience, it's going to hardwire what it is that it needs to protect us from. But I was referring to the dogs that work with soldiers returning from active duty who come home with PTSD. And it's very hard for them to focus and center. Many times they just keep reliving, like we think of a video loop of what they've been through. The person. And the animals have this incredible innate ability to calm and bring that person back in focus, back into their bodies to ground.
Okay.
An incredibly valuable service.
Yeah. Now, this must require special skill on the part of the animal, because the humans that you're referring to are not necessarily skilled at listening.
That's right. That's true. They're skilled in being aware of everything that is around them, which means that their adrenals have been on high alert all through their service. So a lot of times they have deficits in their awareness, but they're feeling that they're completely aware. They can be exposed to sounds that trigger them, the humans, and the animals have a way of getting their attention, whether it's jumping up, whether it's laying on them, whether it's lying across their bodies when they have night terrors, and bringing them back into focus.
In other words, the animal functions as a therapist.
Absolutely. The animal steps in and is able to calm that person down.
And if people are able to better listen to animals, that process could be facilitated further.
Right, exactly. And you know, in the students that I have, the biggest challenge that most of them have is that as a culture we were raised not to listen to animals. That growing up as children, we may have had imaginary friends, and that was sort of put in the category of course your animal's not talking to you, of course that's not. We're finding out that's very different now. We're finding out, and most people actually inside want to believe that they can hear their animals, but it's been trained out of them as they grew up in our society, but there are entire cultures that do.
So are you saying that when a child who has a pet also has an imaginary friend, that the imaginary friend might actually be the animal communicating to
Exactly.
them?
That may be it.
Wow.
Yeah. It's very exciting. And many times when I get the wonderful opportunity to work with children, usually 7 and under, somewhere in there, they will openly tell you what their animals are saying. And it depends on what happens at home. And as a matter of fact, one of the things I really love is working with someone who is pregnant. Their baby is in utero, and the animal and the baby are communicating. And it is fascinating, and sometimes it's absolutely hilarious, because the dog cannot imagine that a human would be born and not know they don't have teeth. Because that is part of what a dog is born with. You have to come in with teeth. You must come in with teeth. That's protection. That's who you are. And so some of the funny conversations that I watch that go on is the dog will say to the baby whose spirit is ready to be born into a physical existence, I have your back. And the child, and many of them are very old souls returning, will say, what do you mean you have my back? Why do I need that? Well, because you don't have any teeth. And this child is not, you know, and the parents absolutely love it. They absolutely love it. So it depends on if the family is supportive to let the child express what's going on. It becomes very rewarding.
Well, so also what I'm hearing here is that just as humans have a tendency to anthropomorphize an animal, a dog might have a tendency to think of us as if we were canine.
Yes. Only we have certain problems. We're pretty slow by their standards. We don't have fur, which is a real problem because it's protection. So many times when we see animals licking babies, they're trying to stimulate the growth of fur. So we have lots of drawbacks from that canid culture.
Isn't that interesting?
Those are just a couple of them. Yeah.
Well, what intrigues me is the modalities through which the communication occurs. You, for example, I understand you get a lot of visual imagery when you communicate with animals.
Lots of pictures. We think of it maybe as in videos. And part of my job is to express to whoever I'm working with how that fits into what we're asking, what the questions are. Many times the animals have so much to share about us. I mean, they really do know more about us than we know about them. And lots of times when there's an animal that has a behavioral issue, it's acting out what's going on in the family. And when the family decides they need help, then I start introducing, if you could just watch this behavior, you might see a reflection, and then listening to your animal. And listening takes practice and a lot of work. It does. But most people are remembering at some point that they actually can hear the telepathy, that they do hear the telepathic messaging. And it's natural for us. We all use telepathy. Part of our listening is to use telepathy.
Even in a conversation like this.
Even in a conversation like this. So even if we're talking about someone who's making a sales pitch, they're actually looking at who they're working with, trying to figure out how to get what they need. Many people that I work with say they will go to a friend's house for a party, and before they even reach for the doorknob, they get a sense of what's going on. We use it all the time. It's just that we haven't been brought up to believe how important it is or understand how important it is. So we are actually communicating with our animals all the time. And one of the biggest complaints that the animals have is they'll say, will you tell her to stop repeating herself? Because the human says, did you, don't, am I? And the animal is hearing the same thing over again. Don't do that. Don't leave that. And the animal already, we're picturing what we want them not to do, which is counterintuitive. We need to picture what we want them to do.
In other words, when we form a mental image, they're picking up on it.
That's right. So when I have people that are going on vacation, I'll give them exercises to do so they can communicate with their animals. And one of the things I warn them about is make sure when you picture your animal, you're picturing your animal in your home. And you coming home to that animal. Don't picture them out by the seaside where you are, because at that point the animal may say, oh my gosh, I got to go find her. And we don't want that to happen.
So there can be a lot of misunderstandings even in the middle of telepathic communication.
That's right. That's why it takes practice and being really conscious and really devoted and wanting to have it happen.
Another idea that I've gleaned from looking through some of your material is the notion that there are different languages that different species of animals use.
That's true. There are different cultures for every animal there is. And it's fascinating because contextually, what a cat may want to communicate would not matter to a dog. Cats feel essentially that dogs are pretty slow, actually, that they're not, as we would say, not the sharpest knife in the drawer. But at the same time, if you're going to be listening to a cat, you also need to understand cats are, from my perspective, some of the best hunters, if not the best hunters on the planet. Now, how do they hunt? They freeze. And they watch to see what moves. Very different from us as humans, where we're grabbing, reaching, maybe not taking that time. So we have so much to learn from the animals, and each culture presents what is important to it. That's what it makes its focus on.
When you say culture, are you referring to animal species?
I am. For instance, canid culture. And canid culture is very different from ours. One of the things that we do that drives dogs crazy is that when we come to meet our friends, we stand in a doorway. Now, in a doorway to an animal, that's coming or going from a den. And dogs know innately, in many species, you can be killed leaving the den or entering the den. The last thing you want to do is pause in that entryway. Not only do we pause in that entryway, we hug each other and hold each other in that doorway. So animals that are, especially dogs that are sensitive to that, can be very crazy when people come to visit. They can actually become aggressive because they're trying to move us out of that danger zone.
So let's suppose that I'm a typical human, which I guess I am, and I'm interested in becoming more open to what animals are trying to communicate to me. How would I start?
The first thing would be sitting quietly. And understanding that you have to get out of your own way. You have to be quiet enough. And not, I need you to say this, I need you to communicate in English, not put what our form and definition of communication is, to sit quietly and watch. Sometimes it can be a flick of a tail, because cats will come and they'll come across and check us. Yeah. We need to understand that's languaging. Mm-hmm. Being quiet and being receptive, and then closing your eyes, clearing your mind screen, and just being in receptivity. Mm-hmm. For people who don't meditate, it helps to start meditating. For people who already meditate, they usually tell me that they'll see their animal at some point during their meditation, and that's a great beginning. Mm-hmm.
Now, when you say their animal, yes. I know we have a sense that humans own everything around us.
Oh,
but I know you refer to Rumi as your teammate, not your animal.
No, he isn't mine. Yeah. No, he isn't. And I think it's really important. There are families that are very clear that their animals are equal family members. Mm-hmm. And they're very clear that they have the respect and their needs need to be met. There are others that think that an animal is less than. There are others that think that we are the highest on the food chain, which really works until you meet a polar bear, and then you discover that you're not highest on the food chain. And they're amazing hunters as well.
Well, I've seen some photos of you with some pretty large animals.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm very fortunate, and I'm very careful, mm-hmm. because I am not in their culture. Yeah. And so what I was raised on Disney films. Mm. I was raised on people going into the desert and making friends with and that's really not realistic. You have to be respectful of that culture. You don't just walk in and assume because you're a human and you could do this that it works. Mm. No, you have to know who you're speaking with. Mm-hmm. Listening to. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So a lot of this communication is at the intuitive level. Mm-hmm. Let me share something with you. I have been, over the years, engaged, as you might imagine, with many different psychic groups. And on one occasion, we were doing something akin to remote viewing, and it involved animal communication with a dolphin. And this was with dolphins. And the group of people were actually, this group at the time, they were in Mexico, off the coast of Cabo San Lucas. And they told me that in their experience, the Mexican dolphins would speak to them in Spanish.
So, what a wonderful question, and here's why. Mm-hmm. If we look at the fact that energy, everything is energy, any form of communication is energy, it isn't effective as communication if we limit that it can only come in one way. Mm-hmm. So in my classes, we work with breeze, we work with temperature, we work with lighting, we work with weather. We work with what is your body sensing when you're near this animal. Mm-hmm. In that time, and dolphins are incredible at reading us like that. Mm-hmm. In that time, those animals and where we come together is the intersection of what we have to learn. So if we are asking for guidance from that animal, there's really divine interpretations that happen. Yeah. So there, if you will, there's an interpreter between us and them, mm-hmm. and all it is an energetic pattern that fits our mm-hmm. pattern. And when that comes together, that's what we hear or experience.
Now, another way of expressing, I think what you just said, is that our subconscious is acting as something of a filter. And
absolutely, beautifully, beautifully. And if we choose to have the subconscious rise to a higher level, then we get even higher sources of information, not limited only mm-hmm. to a particular species.
Now, that gets very interesting because naturally, many of my viewers are interested in higher consciousness. And I gather, perhaps like children, animals are more, it's more of a natural state for them to be kind of in tune with the universe.
Oh, completely. And we were more in tune in an earlier phase of who we are, simply because to exist, we had to be using telepathy. We had to be using any of our senses that we now have shut down. We've become so informational now, mm-hmm. Jeffrey, that instead of in vibing and growing our intuitive side, we have become so left brain with all information coming in, incoming, which is why one of the exercises that I give to people is to turn the sound down on their television and see what's really going on in a newscast, what's really going on in an interview that we're watching, what's really being said, because there's a whole stream of information and many forks from that stream.
Well, and communication specialists, I think for the most part today, would say 85% is nonverbal.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's not just physical. It's not just looking at body language. No, you can have people sitting very still that are very in tune, that know exactly what's going on. And I mean, the most obvious example I can think of that is putting ER doctors in the same room, soldiers returning from active duty. You can have them sitting in silence, and they know if the guy sitting across from them has been in the same experience they have or not. Nobody has to say a word. Why? Because there's an energetic patterning that's already met, non-verbally.
And that's really the area in which you work in the energetics of it all.
It is.
I understand you visualize a lot of that. You're sort of like looking at the aura or energy patterns around.
I do that as well. And the more dedicated and deeper my work gets, the more different ways of communication are offered to me. One time I was sitting in a meeting with my mother that was a financial meeting for her, and someone wanted her to sign a contract and pushed it across the table. And I looked at it, and off the paper rose red lines, like we think of highlighting, under certain sentences, just a strip of red. I'd never seen it before, but I knew innately this means this is out of integrity. So we passed it back to the woman. Of course, she was very upset. And I just said, we need to think about it. You know? And as soon as we got out to the car, my mom said, what did you see? What did you know? But I didn't need to know the legalese. I didn't need to understand it. All I knew was it was out of integrity.
And it's also about you trusting yourself when you get these images.
Yeah, it's what I call the T muscle, the trust muscle. You have to exercise it, and you have to take chances. People used to refer to that what we have is a gift. And I read somewhere many years ago, the gift is the first day you're born. After that, it's skill. You have to be willing to take chances, put it out there. And you have to understand, in some ways, there's no right and wrong, in the sense that in time you may come to understand what the meaning of what you were shown was. It may not happen right away, and that takes years and trust. You may say, but this seems so real. It did, but it may not have happened yet.
You might be looking into the future.
Yes, I had some really heavy experiences when I was 12. I had a nightmare that kept recurring. And it was so scary to me, and it was so real. My parents finally took me to a psychic, Lotte von Strahl, who said to me, you need to know that this is a real thing that will happen. Don't be surprised if you read about it in the newspaper. And 4 years later, I was walking down the hall in my parents' house, and the newspaper, it was as though it levitated. It didn't levitate. But I froze, and I realized, oh my gosh, this is it. It's in the newspaper. And it was the Tate LaBianca birders. And I wouldn't tell my parents about it because I was afraid they'd be involved. So.
But then now you're talking about something that comes up almost inevitably for people who open up to these realms. And that is that there are dangers and fears associated with it. One of them being the fear that other people will think you're crazy.
You know, it's interesting. My parents, who were on the board of ASPR, American Society for Psychic Research, for 17 years, they told me at 3 years old, honey, that's nice, but just make sure you keep it inside the house. So they let me know it was okay to talk about it inside the house. But it wasn't until I was 9 that they got involved with ASPR.
Well, and you're fortunate. Most parents don't have such an affiliation.
Right, that's true. And I'm not sure which came first, the chicken or the egg on that one. I don't know.
But as people begin to sense that they're having experiences that are not part of the normal human consensus reality, that becomes a little frightening for people. That's where trust is important.
That's where trust is important. And also, so many more people are waking up. That's usually the expression that, for me, it's remembering. I think everybody is just starting to remember now that there are people you can find that have like experiences. Yeah. And there's a lot of comfort in that. There's a lot of comfort in that. And it's so important to support each other. This is a time when we need more communication consciously that we're taking in.
And one of the points you made earlier when we were speaking is that as humans become more open to communicating and listening to animals, they also open themselves up to a wide range of their own capabilities.
That's right. So I have a lot of people that come into the classes that want to hear their animals speak, but they leave realizing, oh my gosh, I actually have been hearing more. And rather than being chastised for it, they get excited about it. And they're given permission. They give themselves a hall pass. To make it okay. To make it okay. To be in receivership for other forms of information. And then, of course, we go into protection and awareness, because you don't want to just put an antenna up and catch whatever's flying by. That's not the point. Not usable. Not usable.
So discernment is important.
Absolutely, discernment.
Well, Miranda Alcott, this has been an enlightening discussion. I'm growing already, and although I haven't been with an animal in my family for decades, you're making me rethink, or I'm choosing to rethink that. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you for inviting us.
It's been a pleasure to have you and Rumi here in the studio.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
And thank you for being with us.